Hello everybody, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening depending on where you are in this amazing world. My name is Donovan Jolly, and welcome everybody once again for another amazing video of DIY investing. I wanted to share with you guys a very educational video mapping out the entire price history of Bitcoin. I've been doing a lot of studying into understanding cycles, midway points of cycles, left and right translations of cycles, and for today's video, I'm going to be breaking down in a very informative video exactly how to go about investing in these, what it means for the long-term trend of Bitcoin, and why I believe that the blow-off top is coming and it is part of a much bigger 15-year cycle that we're about to see the resolution of. If you're new and just find this channel, always remember to do me a favor by leaving a like, comment, and subscribing to this channel for more updates. Always remember to click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these amazing videos like the one provided for you here. And make sure you guys sign up and join the Discord server or download my free ebook. Links are going to be provided for you in the description for both of those. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. And with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, so here we are to talk about today's video. Now I thought about it, and originally what I was going to do was make a really detailed chart to post inside of my private group on Discord. But when it came down to it, I figured that it was going to be much easier and more valuable if I actually made a video about this, breaking it down, explaining it, so that it was a little bit easier to follow along with. I know a lot of people get kind of confused, especially when it comes to understanding time frames inside of charts, but I'm going to go down and break this for you guys in a super easy to understand way. I believe that what Bitcoin is gearing up for is a major multi-year cycle top. I don't believe that we've had it yet, but I believe that we are about to be getting that. And what we're currently in right now is just another one of those corrective periods before we ultimately get our final move of the cycle. And so I wanted to go through and explain some things. I want to talk to you guys about how the cycles work. Aside from analyzing the 4-year cycles, we're going to be looking at left and translations of cycles as well as the midway points of cycles, because this is ultimately how we know where the trend is most likely to resolve to. And so I'm going to go through and explain these. Now, we're going to go through, I'm going to give you guys the exact definition of what a translation is. Now, a right translation and a left translation are the exact same thing. They're just opposites of each other, right? So I'm going to go through here and explain this. The main thing we're going to be talking about in today's video is right translations, because we've had so many of them, but we will also get into left translations as well. Now, a right translation in a cycle is when the peak is beyond the halfway point. So keep in mind, every single market cycle that there is, you're never actually measuring the cycle from peak high to peak high. You're actually measuring the cycle from peak low to peak low, because the highs generally don't sync up as much as the lows will. The lows are going to be almost exact every single time, whereas the highs can actually differentiate and they can vary. And so the peak inside of a right translation cycle happens after the halfway point. And a left translation is when the cycle peak occurs before the halfway point. Usually, the underlying trend from a longer cycle determines the amount of translation in the shorter cycle. So let's go through and explain exactly what this means. What is the midway point? How do you analyze the midway point? And how do you really determine whether it's a right translation or a left translation? Now, let's get through here. So we're going to start off. We could technically analyze over here, but honestly, I'd rather just start with this trend over here because it starts to sync up a lot better. Now, what we're going to do is every single cycle low, I've came over here and drawn a dotted line. We've got one there, we've got one here, we've got one there, and then we've even got one at our next area of interest, which is supposed to be November of 2022. That's where we will mark exactly 1 year from the top at about 69,000. And so we're putting that there just for a line in the sand. I wouldn't put too much faith on that right now. Wait for us to actually get there. Now, whenever we're analyzing this, you're going to be drawing from the now whenever you're doing this, we're going to take it from the cycle low. We're going to go all the way over here to our next cycle low, and that's one cycle. From cycle low to cycle low equals one full cycle. Now this equals 1,155 days. What is 1,155 divided by 2? It equals about 570 approximately. And so I've came over here and I've drawn a dotted line. So notice something, guys, here. This dotted line, this green dotted line, is our midway point of the cycle. Remember, inside of a right translation in a cycle is when the peak is beyond the halfway point. So when we look at the chart of Bitcoin, if this is the halfway point, where's the peak? Well, the peak's up here. So what does this mean? Well, this means that the peak was beyond the halfway point indicated by this green line. And so this is what's called a right translation cycle. Notice how we go through a short-term bear market, we go through this corrective phase right here, and then where does the trend go? Well, it once again goes up to the upside. And that's kind of the point that we're trying to make here. The general trend will resolve to whatever the translation was on average. It's not always going to be, but that's generally how a translation works. And so we've actually had only right translations throughout the entire history. If we come back over here and actually look at even our first cycle, let's make this one a dotted line, make it black. If we come over here and actually analyze from this cycle low to this cycle low, we get about 483. Half takes us to about right here inside of the bigger picture cycle. Make this one green. And so we can see that we also got a cycle top after our halfway point. And so that's why we're continuing to see this trend breaking higher. If a right translation cycle ends up playing out, most likely the next trend that plays out, the new cycle is just going to keep going in the same direction. So if this has always been right translation cycles, why are we to expect that it's randomly going to change, right? And so that is what a right translated cycle is. You measure from the peak low of cycle to the peak low. The midway point of those two variables equals the midway point. And if you get a cycle top past that, then most likely the next trend of the 4-year cycle is going to continue to go up. So once again, we see that same rule of thumb. We got our cycle top that occurred after our halfway point. We do get a short-term correction, but then we start our brand new cycle over here. So let's come over here and let's once again analyze from peak low to peak low. What do we get? About 1,428. So what's half of that? Half of that's going to be about 720 approximately, 721. And this is our halfway point. So once again, guys, where did the cycle top for Bitcoin happen in the 2017 bull run? Well, if this is our halfway point, the true cycle top occurred well after that, right? By about 300 days in which our true cycle top occurred. So this is once again a right translated cycle. If the topping point of the cycle is beyond the midway point of the cycle, it's a right translated cycle. And so once again, we go through another corrective phase here, and then we start the next 4-year cycle. If we take this time frame and we draw from peak low all the way over here to our projected peak low, because keep in mind, guys, we don't have one yet. Our projected low of the next 4-year cycle is supposed to be sometime in November at the end of this year. So wherever that's going to be, it could be, end of November, it could be sometime in December. It's not always going to be 100% exact. This is just the average that we're following. This is approximately where our next 4-year cycle low is going to be taking us. Now, guys, our halfway point of our most recent cycle took us to below the all-time highs. It was right when we first started breaking those all-time highs at the very beginning of 2021. That was where our halfway point was. And so once again, guys, in the same exact way that all of the prior cycles have played out, this is what's known as a right translated cycle. We got the midway point, and then our cycle top occurred after the midway point. So once again, this is a right translated cycle. Inside of a right translated cycle, it's most likely to resolve in the same direction the trend has been going previously. If we look at the entire price history of Bitcoin, where is the trend going? Well, it's always just going up. And so that is where we're getting into our next cycle. We haven't even started the next cycle yet because we haven't got our cycle low of this one. Whenever this short-term correction ends, even if it does something like this, bounce, and then come back down to retest it, and we do something like this, it doesn't matter. The 4-year cycle is showing that sometime in November of this year is when our next cycle should be coming into play. Now, guys, this is important because I believe that for the first time inside of our next 4-year cycle, we are not actually going to see a right translated cycle. And I want to explain what potentially could happen if, in fact, we get our first left translated cycle in the entire price history of Bitcoin. Now, guys, inside of Bitcoin cycles, let's come over here real quick and let's remove some drawing tools. Let's just get these out of the way real quick, and let's just come over here and take a look at this cycle. And let's just map out, how it's going to look if, in fact, we do get our first left translated cycle. Now, many people have been asking me, do I think that we're never going to see a blow off top? Do I think that this is dead? The cycle is just never going to see another one like that? And the answer is no. And what I see inside of this cycle is actually a hybrid. I see this as following 4-year cycle time frame still, but I don't believe that this entire Elliott wave impulse is done. I still view this as a 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're still waiting on our wave 5 impulse. I believe that this is going to be a 4-year cycle within a larger impulse, right? Notice how every prior 4-year cycle, we finished our impulses within that cycle, right? Every single 4-year cycle. This wasn't enough time in a 4-year cycle, but really when we start getting on those same degrees of trend, we can see that every cycle has our impulses, and then at the bottom of that bear market correction is when we end that 4-year cycle and begin the new one. But we can see here that the impulse is always happening in the bull run itself. I think that this cycle is going to be the first one in which we haven't actually finished our big picture impulse yet. And I think that this is where we're kind of getting into this point where there's way more money inside the market now, to where we're literally following kind of a hybrid cycle between the 4-year cycle as well as the lengthening cycle. They're all part of the same bigger trend. We're still following the 4-year cycle time frames, and I think that that's pretty obvious when we analyze these time frames and put real date tools and stuff in the mix. And that's why I believe that, you know, this is still going to follow the 4-year cycle time frames. But what comes after this is most likely going to be our first left translated cycle. Now, what is that actually going to look like if in fact we get a left translated cycle? Well, if we're going to be analyzing from cycle low to cycle low, let's ignore this cycle and let's start to look at this one over here. Let's assume that our next cycle low comes in here sometime in November of this year as it's projected. Remember guys, we're looking at about a year from our top. So that's going to be taking us to, once again, about the beginning week, or should say the end of that first week of November. And so let's assume that we get our bottom in November, we follow the same time frames, and then we start the next cycle. Well, the reason why I actually think that we could be getting ready for our first left translated cycle is because of the fact our Elliott wave impulse isn't done. We're still missing our wave 5, and I'm going to continue to stick to that belief because I really am confident that that's the case. We're missing our wave 5. We never got our wave 5. Even though this entire wave 4 corrective phase is happening and playing out inside of a 4-year cycle, which historically has been a bear market, I don't believe that this is a standard bear market like we're always have been accustomed to seeing. It's not like this was, it's not like this was, it's not like this was. It's its own sort of market structure entirely, something we haven't seen before. And so that's why I believe that we're in a hybrid cycle. We're following the 4-year cycle timeframes, but this itself isn't your standard bear market. This is just a wave 4 before our final blow off top of a multi-year cycle. That's the big thing I want you guys to realize. This will be the top of a multi-year cycle. It's not just going to be some, you know, it's not going to be 3 years of bull run like we've been accustomed to seeing prior. I think we would get a short 1 year, maybe year and a half tops of a bull run, and then we'd follow with a multi-year correction. And so let's explain that. If this is our projected 4-year cycle low, then about 720 days is our projected midway point. Remember guys, inside of a left translated cycle, which is the opposite of a right, left translation is when the cycle peak occurs before the halfway point. So keep in mind guys, every cycle up to this point with Bitcoin, we ended up topping after the halfway point, right? Halfway point's right here, the cycle top occurred here. Halfway point's right here, cycle top occurred here. The halfway point was here, cycle top occurred here. The halfway point was here, the cycle top occurred here, right? So every single time we've had a right translated cycle. I think that this is going to be the first time in which we get a left translated cycle. And so based off of our 4-year cycle low, wherever that gets, you know, whether it's December, sometime November, we'll have to wait and see before we can draw a specific line in the sand and say, okay, this is our low, right? But we're based off of what we have to go off of. This is where our projected cycle low is to be. And so if this is approximately where our cycle low is, and we draw the halfway point, that's going to be taking us to about the 4th of November, 2024. That is where our true midway point of the cycle is supposed to be. So we're going to have one of two things, because no matter what, one of these things is going to play out. We're either going to get another right translated cycle that'll just play out like all of the other cycles have prior, or we'll get our first left translated cycle, and that will actually start the beginning of a multi-year bear market. Keep in mind, guys, that if we did get a left translated cycle, it would do the exact opposite of what the bull runs did. So notice here that inside the bear market corrections, they lasted about a year. Really, once we start to get into about 2013 is when they start lasting a year. This one lasted about 400 days. This one lasted almost exactly a year, 364 days. Right, and so if we do get our projected low that takes place in November, that will also be a 1-year bear market. So what we've been accustomed to seeing inside of a Bitcoin bull run is 1-year bear markets followed by 3-year bull runs. And that's just the way Bitcoin's trend is usually played out. And that's the way a 4-year cycle works inside of a right translated cycle. We've always been in a right translated cycle, so obviously we're going to continue to follow that same trend. And so, we're going to watch and see exactly what ends up playing out. But I mean, let's assume that we get our cycle bottom here in November of sometime this year. And then we start our new bull run, right? Might go through something like this. We might run all the way up and make a big move, as we get closer towards the end of next year. But the big thing that we need to remember here, guys, is we're going to have to top before this green line. And that's kind of a thing, is whether we top before or after, I think it's important that you guys remember these time frames and you draw them on your charts, because this is where we're going to be able to know whether it's going to be a right translation or whether it's going to be a left translation. Just having these lines on the chart doesn't mean we're going to know exactly when the cycle top is, doesn't mean that we're going to know exactly when we should sell, because that's not always going to be in the charts themselves. All we're going to be able to do is stick to a plan and kind of scale out as we're in profit. But I mean, the big thing that we need to remember here is that if we do get any point of a top, a cycle top that occurs before this green line, what most likely is going to follow after is a multi-year bear market. Where we've been in, where we go through 3 years of bull run followed by a 1-year corrective phase, 3 years bull run, 1-year corrective phase, it would do the opposite. We'd have basically a 1-year bull run that would take place at the end of this year, and then it would end, sometime at the end of 2023 to the beginning of 2024. We'd go on a 1-year big tear, massive impulse, and then instead of going on a 3-year bull market, we would only do 1 year of a bull market followed by 3 years of a bear market, where we'd top, we'd come back down, we'd go, I don't know what it would look like, but we'd have a big multi-year bear market, a major cycle top of a multi-year cycle. And what I find is interesting is, coming at that 2024 time frame, Bitcoin was added to exchanges. Well, technically, Bitcoin's ledger went live January 3rd of 2009. So, if we get over here to 2024 timeframes, that's going to also put us at the 15-year threshold, where the average length of time an asset takes to get massively adopted in the mainstream is 15 years. It's actually 10 to 15 years, but having this, our first left translated cycle that would occur sometime, 2024, that would be putting us right at that 15-year threshold. And so for me, there's a lot of correlation that has to go into the charts that tells me, hey, we're also at the same point where historically this is a major topping point for asset classes. Asset classes that have been on a big rise, getting a lot of adoption, solving a lot of problems, major use cases in society. After about 10 to 15 years, that's when, we get our major cycle top. That's when the whole adoption curve has kind of taken place, and then all of the hype is done. That 15-year cycle top is going to be coming into play right around, this 2024 timeframes. And so it would make sense to me, that if we're going to get a left translated cycle, it would probably occur sometime at the end of 2023, right? That's kind of my thoughts on what I see playing out from here inside the market. And I wanted to give you guys this little update as a way to kind of simplify some thoughts that I've been having inside the market, what I actually think is most likely going to be playing out from a bigger term thing. I don't think the 4-year cycle is dead. Obviously, I think it's very much still in effect. But I also think that this is a hybrid cycle where for the first time ever, we're not having a standard bear market like we usually would. The price action's much different. But we're also missing our major wave 5. And so I think that with us going into our first left translated cycle, potentially, because it's not confirmed by any means, that would show a 1-year bull market. It would make sense to me that that would also correlate with being our true cycle top, because that would also be, just 1-year bull market would also be the completion of a wave 5, which when I look at the chart, that's the only thing that we're missing here. We're literally only missing a major wave 5 before this cycle is done. And when I look at all of the other impulses of this, every single 4-year cycle ended after an impulse, right? This is the first one where we didn't get a completed impulse before, our cycle ended. And so that's why I think we're in more of a hybrid cycle. This is a wave 1, 2, wave 3, We're currently inside of wave 4. Our quote-unquote bear market is just a wave 4 correction before we get a 1-year bull market followed by 3-year multi-year bear market on the way back down. That's my personal belief on the matter. Our next 4-year cycle low technically takes us to November of 2026. And so, it would be a long period before we ever got another cycle low. I honestly think that we'd go for another low. We'd go way past that time frame. And whereas a lot of people are going to be watching for this 4-year cycle in the next one, I honestly think that this could be the time where we don't actually get a right translated cycle like we've always been accustomed to seeing, but instead it's the opposite. Everybody starts to get hip to the 4-year cycle idea. Everybody's starting to get excited about that, thinking that they're going to nail the bottom and sell the top. And then that's going to be the exact point where the cycle flips to the left translation and stops doing the thing that everybody thinks it will. And so these are my thoughts, guys. I wanted to share this video with you to summarize some thoughts. If you guys found value in this, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these amazing videos. If you guys want to join the Discord server, download my free ebook. Links are in the description for that. You guys can also sign up for my VIP group. Follow all the trades that I take, all my expert picks, NFT picks, things of that nature. Links are in the description to go ahead and join all of that. Thank you guys so much for the support. I look forward to seeing you guys in the group. And with that being said, I will see you in the next one. As always, peace out.